Hello and welcome to the Create channel arrangement of a song final video. In this video I'm going to be taking you through every track, every trick, every use of effects, all the various routing within Ableton Live, just an overall breakdown of how this song was put together. So, without further ado, we go to the kick. This channel here is actually an audio channel that's set up to take the kick from another channel which Battery lives on. You can see on here that the kick takes its feed from Battery 4, Stereo 3 and 4. If we actually go to the Battery plugin, we will see that we've actually routed the kick from Battery to the bus 1, and bus 1 itself is actually routed to a direct out of Stereo 3 and 4, which is what the audio channel that we looked at earlier is taking its routing from, right there. So that just means that we get only the sounds that we've chosen within Battery going directly to one channel, and that gives us the power to process a specific sound or a set of sounds out of Battery. So you can see in this particular example, I've used EQ just to carve out and enhance certain frequencies. I've also added Transient Master to give the kick more attack and a little bit more sustain. Overall, that the fundamental part of the track being kick, it's important that we isolate it. Next up we have some loops. These are production loops that were produced with house music in mind. This particular section is just the percussive only section. Various things are done to this track. They use a lot of automation in this track. As you can see here, the automation actually reduces the frequency of the auto filter, which gives it that nice sweep down in the filter. Same applies here. You can see the actual automation event going from high frequency down to low on the auto filter. Okay. Next up we have the rest of Battery. So Battery, as you'll remember, has the kick going out. But if we go to the master output, that's basically everything else that Battery has, which is all that kind of stuff. A variety of things. You've got hi-hats, shakers, claps, snares. You see the kick's actually still being triggered there, but because we've muted that and soloed this channel, all you can hear is the remaining sounds. I've used a lot of processing within Battery, saturation, limiter, compressor, just to tame that, just to give it a bit of warmth. And because it's separate from the kick, I can stipulate effects that are specific to those particular sounds. Just give it an overall sense of being sort of congealed together, and that's always useful when you're trying to get some levels established. Within Battery you've also got an effects chain, so you can actually add a little bit of reverb, delay, as you can probably see there. Next up we move on to essentially a sidechained hi-hat effect. What it actually is a heavily EQ'd sound, atmospheric sound that's sidechained to a 4 on the floor kick. That sidechain plays a huge part in this track. A lot of things are triggered off it. Sidechaining essentially means that you can take a feed into a compressor and that will affect that sound accordingly, dipping the sound as the sidechain sound takes place. The sidechain kick is just one kick sound that's muted, so that you don't actually hear the sidechained source, but it has its impact when it's used on things like compressors and various other things. Groover is a drum rack, which actually came with Ableton 9. It just had a lot of organic acoustic sounds to it, so I wrote a few beats with this, triggering all these various different sounds, a lot of bongos and congas and the like. This goes to a delay effect, as you can probably hear there. It's also shelved off in the bass frequencies, so it doesn't clash with any of the bass sounds, kick sounds, etc. Now this sound, as unlikely as it sounds, is actually quite a key part of this track. All I essentially did was take a waveform and take little chunks out of it. You can then trigger those using the keyboard or programming them in on the timeline. If you look on there, you can see there's only really 2 actual sounds that I used. I used the frequency and drive with a bit of resonance on that sound to give it the sound that you hear. It's also going out to a delay, which in itself is sidechained to the kick. Automation on there, so we can increase the amount of delay that takes place on there. And the same applies to this sound, which is a similarly chopped up sample of the main brass riff, and just triggers a few sort of slivers of that brass riff. So just to give you an idea of how the routing is taking place, I set up about 3 or 4 different sort of group channels that allow me to route various things like the rhythm, as you can see in this instance, and that then allows you to compress things together. The glue compressor is particularly effective for that. Okay, so we've got the kick running with the rhythm. You can see on the auto filter there's a certain amount of shelving going on the high frequencies there, and in that particular section of the song that just happens to work, but the point here being that you can see the rhythm track actually has most of the rhythm going through it. Vocal stabs. These are just various little slivers of vocal sounds. I threw those in later on. I felt like it needed something to give it a bit of humanness, so I threw these sounds in. And moving on to the bass sounds. These were essentially split into a deep bass sound, courtesy of Native Instruments, as you'll see here. Massive has a great range of sub basses, this one being no exception. As you can probably tell, it's also sidechained to the kick. Not a great deal more to say about that, but you can hear it sort of pumping on the kick there. The next bass sound up is a higher pitched one, shelved off. It also has 2 oscillators to it, one which is playing the 5th. That oscillator has its own pitch automation, so you can see the oscillator to 3 transpose there, as well as the VCF cutoff. You can hear the cutoff just expanding a little bit there. A lot of automation on this track. If you look to the right where the loop markers are set, that's actually the automation for the transposition of oscillator 3. So what you can hear there is the fifth dropping down to the root note. Okay. And the other final sort of bass-ish sound, more of a lead sound, is a massive 303 clone. The automation on this varies from the envelope length to a couple of sends to the delay and reverb. It's actually a really nice sort of emulation of a classic 303 sound. It's got that real cutting sound to it. You'll see later on the automation actually impacts that cutoff and just opens it up a bit. You can also hear the envelope is shut down there and it opens up again. As the track goes on, it just gives it that expression that the track needed at that point. You can see it's very tight there. The filter's opening a little bit, as you can probably see on the automation. You can see the filter on the instrument itself just sort of ramping up a little bit. Filter 2 also has a certain amount of cut-off variation to it. Here you can see the effects of having the ascend to the long delay automated. The long delay there is again a sidechained sound. We're just soloing the delay effect, so all you're hearing there is the actual effect itself without the source. There's a delay which also has filtering on it right there. I think all these, apart from one of the reverbs, are all sidechained as well. And what you find when you sidechain your effects is it just gives a bit more space to the track. It's not quite as muddy and thick. Getting through the tracks now. The next track is various, what I would say are sort of samples. The thing in common with most of these is that they're almost like droney sounds. Some of them are reversed, some of them are just held, frozen sounds. They add atmosphere and movement to the track. This is actually the opening sound, which was a frozen VST instrument that sort of I inadvertently, for some bug, for the reason of some bug or other, it froze. So it sort of captured it and then tweaked a few of the parameters while I was recording it, and it just had this sort of nice droney sound to it. I threw on Brain Dance, which gives a sort of a 50% mix-ish of being chopped up and fed back into the mix. Then limited that because as I opened up the filter, it got a bit ear-splittingly loud, so I banged the filter on there as well. These are just for emphasis. They're essentially have the same effect as a crash cymbal, but in a more electronic context. That is a reversed piano. That is a reversed bass sound. And all these sort of give an introduction into the next section of the track, which you'll hear when I play the track in full at the end. The trick to creating a nice reversed sound like that is to bang a load of reverb on a sound and play the sound with the reverb tail and then reverse it, and then you can throw it into an audio track. This had a huge reverb tail on it, as you can probably tell, and it has a really nice sort of sense of building. And finally, another drum rack. This is kind of a chopped up drum rack where every sample is part of a whole. So if you play them in order, it'll play an entire drum loop. But what that then allows you to do is to experiment with the drum loop itself. As you can hear there, that's just one sort of sliver of a drum sample. When you play them all together, you get an entire drum loop, and I just had a bit of fun moving things around, chopping it up a little bit. Gives it almost a drum and bassy feel. Obviously, we're not really at the right BPM for that, but it was just nice to throw on the end of the track. The master itself actually has auto filter on it, so that the entire track filters down, a sort of sweeping filter. So, the main sort of melodic part of this track comes courtesy of Monarch, which is one of Native's instruments. It's a lovely looking instrument, very simple. It's essentially an emulation of a mini Moog. So what I did is I split two of these instruments in two with slightly different sounds to them. What these do is they essentially play the half of the melody. You can hear there's quite a sort of significant difference there between the two. They're slightly panned apart, 12 left and right. When you put them together, it just gives a nice sense of separation, a bit of interest. You can hear the two there. They, in turn, are then routed to another track called Root Riff. And what that allows me to do is to use auto filter on both those sounds. You'll hear the filter open up here, and you can actually see it opening up there on the auto filter. Auto filter is one of those plugins that just really does what you want it to do. It's got a really nice warm feel to it. And the only real sort of harmonic chordal content to this entire track comes courtesy of another mini Moog emulation. Again, these are panned left and right. Very sort of brassy sound. Big shout out to G-Force, Dave Spears, one of the creators of Mini Monster, which is absolutely fantastic instrument. Just if you want warmth and sort of sense of authenticness, look no further. Fair amount of automation on these. Again, these go to routed to another track so that you can deal with them both at the same time. This has a fair amount of auto filter on there. That last riff in particular has a nice bit of wobbly auto filter, so it sort of opens and shuts very quickly. Just gives it a bit of I don't know, spontaneity, a bit of funkiness. And then this final one works nice. Piano comes in. So when I said there was no chordal instruments, I was lying. This is a heavily melodic part. I was just messing around on the piano, came up with this little riff, and I thought this would actually be a really nice counterpoint to the much more metronomic and dance-led track. It's just not Native Instruments, Ableton's grand piano sound. Auto-filtered, tons of sidechain reverb. As you can see, it's been sent there. And as you build that reverb up, it creates this amazing sort of pad sound, which is also sidechained as well, so it still gives it a sort of rhythmic feel. And at one point I actually take out the dry source and just leave that sidechain reverb with the piano in place. And that's what that sounds like. Really sort of ethereal and mysterious and all the rest of it. Atmospheric. That's how that looks. It's a reverb, sidechain compressed, then compressed to sort of maintain the volume of it, and then EQ'd, shelved off bottom and top. You can do a lot with effects by placing additional effects on them. It really does give you a huge amount of control, Ableton. And the more you get into it, the more you discover you can do. I doubled up this piano sound with a sort of solo mono mini monster sound. On its own, it sounds pretty thin and weedy, but if you combine that with a piano, it sounds really good. I sort of faded that in, opened up the filter on it, and it just adds weight and sort of a more meaningful theme to that piano riff. You'll probably hear that now. You see the volume being increased there on the secondary piano riff sound. The filter opens up a bit. As I say, a huge amount of automation is included on this track. It seems like a lot of work, but actually it's not. It's lots of individual pieces of work, but ultimately it's well worth it. It just gives that life to the overall track. And here is the overall track, starting with that atmosphere. And that stabby sound that I mentioned, you'll hear coming very subtly. Gives a sense of movement, of rhythm to the track, so you've got a feeling of how the rhythm feels, what sort of BPM we're working in. This offbeat, hi-hat beat, sidechained sound does the same thing. And you can see, put a marker in there where the kick comes in. Just add that this is actually the pre-mastered version of this track. I'll put a link in the notes to the final mastered track for anyone who wants to hear it. Obviously, once something's been mastered, it has a lot more presence. Feels a lot louder. You can see battery with all its various sounds that were put in there. Coming in there and coming to the end of the atmosphere sound, and we're into the bass. The bass sort of interacting there with the sidechain kick. Just gets out of the way of the kick, which is the intention. Acid bassline comes in quite subtly with that short envelope. Filter opening up a little bit. You'll hopefully understand when you hear that pre-produced house loop come in, what it's there for. So there's that house loop in all its glory. Fair amount going on at the same time here. This is pretty much all the rhythmic elements all together. subtle offbeat sound that you're hearing in the background is actually the sidechain's delay being used on that stabby sound. So as I say, even though it's quite subtle, it actually plays quite a big part in the track. As you can probably see down here, this is where those where the more melodic sounds come in. It's nice to give a drop at some point in a dance track, and if it's a new idea, I think that's all the better. You can see that little sync sound coming in. Battery providing that beat. Those reverse sounds and its effect. I quite like this drop. It's just very rhythmic, and you'll hear those vocal stabs coming any second. Massive amount of reverb thrown on the piano there. Just gives it that space and that sort of time to decay before the piano comes in. You hear that secondary piano line coming very, very subtly here. The filter opens up. You see at the top of the arrangement, there's various little markers. They're sort of called locators, and you can create them at any point in the track in your arrangement. And it's really handy when you're trying to navigate around an arrangement. If you're looking to just work on one particular section, it'll actually allow you to just automatically create loop points from the start and end of your locators. So you can just loop round indefinitely and fiddle away. So we'll just go to the end of that because unfortunately there was a loop on there and it looped back. And this is one of my favourite little bits of the track actually, the way this bass comes in. I think there's been a lack of bass for quite a bit at the track at that point. So as it comes in, it's quite a nice sort of underpinning feeling to the track. And you can see the final reverse sound that's going to start any second. Building the drums a little bit, moving away from the 4 on the floor at this point. Just adds a bit of variation to the track. I actually imagined this in my head quite clearly, like exactly how that drum track was going to sound to this section. You just hear how that reverse sound brings us into the final 4 on the floor. sort of final euphoric end to the track. It's really quite a dynamic piece. And I just felt it needed something extra on the outro of this, so that's where I put the breakbeat in. Just moved a few of these sections around so it just had a bit of variety to it. And in the master, you will see the auto filter taking effect. Basically, just rather than a volume fade out, I thought I'd go for a filtered fade out. It just seemed to suit the piece. What I also like about this is that the last thing you actually hear, because it's the lowest frequency element of the track, is the kick. And that is it. So thank you very much for watching. If you've watched all the making of a song and the arrangement of a song videos, then well done you. If you haven't and you want to go into a huge amount of detail on how this thing was put together, you can watch all the live streams of the creation of this track, which were uploaded over the course of the last sort of 3 or 4 months. That's it for that track. I will be producing various videos in the future, tutorials, making some more tracks. I hope you enjoyed this series. If you have, feel free to like and subscribe. Thank you.